Hi, Sarah. Thank you for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, Sarah, you've got an interesting story because that is not a British accent. That's a very Australian accent that you've got. Now, you're very sort of out there on social media. You share all the stuff you're doing, and I've always enjoyed following you. But can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your property business?
Cool. I am from Australia. That's where we started. I run Old Street Property with my husband, who's also Australian. We came over to the UK in 2016 after probably having, I'd say, probably a 7-year run in Australian property, doing buy-to-lets and flips. So that's what we were doing in Sydney and Melbourne. Came over to the UK in 2016 and we started off again probably around 2017 with single lets again. That's all we knew. We were single let landlords. At the time, we were like single let landlords for life. And so we loved the refurb process. That's why we did it. And so start off with single lets. And it wasn't until 2019 when I had my first round of mat leave that we started doing a bit more education. Started looking at more cash flowing strategies in order to build that cash flow, because kids just change everything. So that's how we fell into HMOs. But prior to that, I didn't even know what a HMO was. And in Australia, they mean something very different. So we started to get into HMOs, and now we've built our HMO portfolio.
And you're an accountant, you were an accountant. Do you still do any accountancy at all, Sarah, other than maybe for your own businesses?
No, that's all the accounting I do these days. I'm ex-commercial accountant, so I did that for about 13 years, and now with the second round of mat leave, not going back.
Okay, so numbers is your bag. Is that fair to say? Cool. Any comparisons to Sydney for a start? That's one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, I would definitely say that. I think looking now at the market, I don't think I could buy in anymore. At least not the prime stuff that people are after. I think the average house price is now about 1.2, probably now about 1.3, 1.4 million. So you're talking like a full-on London market. When I thought we were buying at the height in 2015, and even that was a massive stretch for us. And looking back now of what it's valued now, it is absolutely crazy. It's definitely a capital growth market.
So you've kept your stuff in Australia?
We kept our Sydney stuff because that's where our family is. So we always thought that's where our family's based, still based. We would at one stage go back there maybe. And so we kept the ones from the very beginning. We haven't sold them at all. When we moved to Melbourne, we did a few flips on the side because that's what kept us going. We were away from family. We didn't have anything to do on weekends, and we love refurbs. So that was a perfect combination to do flips, actually build that cash pot. But once we moved away, we don't have any connections to Melbourne in terms of family. So we decided to sell up and keep the Sydney portfolio.
But I guess that means you're officially global investors then. You've got stuff in the UK, you've got stuff in Australia. That's cool. Any similarities between the markets and what you were doing? I know your husband, Andrew, is an electrician. Are they worlds apart, or actually, is it the same stuff, just different patch?
It's honestly the same. I mean, I think the markets are very different. So if you treat Sydney like very London market, very capital growth based, it's a different strategy for different areas. But the principles of investing around the world, maybe not around the world, but in Australia, it's exactly the same principles. So that's what I would say to that one.
So professional HMOs is really kind of what you've been getting your teeth into here. But when you came over, you started with the single lets, is that right?
Yep.
Did you have any issues as non-doms investing? Because I know I've spoken to a lot of people, and in fact worked with some people who have had issues. But it sounds like this is dead easy for you.
I wish I could say it was dead easy. I think the way we got around it was Andrew actually has a British passport. So he actually has Scottish ancestry,
Right.
which is where we would get around that. In terms of lending options, because of the single lets, I'm on there as well. It proved quite difficult because I was considered a flight risk. So the number of lenders was significantly narrowed down. And so I guess I wouldn't say we're paying ridiculous rates, but the rates weren't the most favorable, I would say. So I think.
Are you still? Is that still the case, Sarah? Like, do they still sort of consider you a flight risk now?
Well, I'm now getting indefinite leave to remain, so I think that might
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
We got around that by putting only Andrew on a separate company because
Okay.
he was just full British. It was the less directors, the less hassle,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the way we did that. But obviously now that I have indefinite leave to remain, now we can start looking at putting myself back on for company structures.
Yeah. Okay. So off the bat, this it wasn't completely straightforward, and I guess the other question I've got for you is you were investing in single lets. Obviously, things have been going quite well. Why did you decide to invest in HMOs?
I think it was after baby number one. Um,
You just
I
needed
kind
more of a
of
challenge.
Yeah, I think
It's-
it was. I had a lot of reservations around tenants. I was
Mm,
very scared of them. We'd always use a letting agent. I didn't
mm,
want to really. I wanted to have that arm's length, like
yeah.
get away, because if anything went wrong, we weren't educated enough in terms of UK landlording to feel confident to self-manage.
Hmm.
And it was only here that I started to realize, oh, actually, a lot of people self-manage, and I thought, why would you do that? And it was when I had time to then re-educate myself. That's when I went, actually, it's not probably as bad as I make it out to be. I just never had the time and the knowledge to figure out how to do it. It was, very demanding day jobs for both of us. We did not want to add self-managing on top of that of a day job. Just wasn't going to happen for us.
And when you started to do it, was that after you'd gone? Was that after you basically had kind of gone to mat leave and had your time back to actually invest in kind of learning how to be a landlord and what's required from a legislation
Yeah.
point of view?
And I think that was also when, I guess, locally networking with others,
Mm,
knowing that they were using HMOs to, I guess, free themselves from the day job. And at the time, it was very enticing. So I didn't really need to go back to the workforce like I did after baby one. But I felt like I just didn't know what else there was. And so we kind of did HMOs with a lot of the risk adverse version, I would say, because we didn't go full hog, all that kind of stuff. I think we bought our first HMO knowing if it didn't work out, there was 5 other exits involved. So we could either, it wasn't going to work, we give it to a renter. It wasn't going to work, give it to a high street specialist agent. If it wasn't going to work, then we could you could just sell it or convert it back into a single let. So there was lots of multiple options to de-risk the profile of buying our first HMO, which I think made us a little bit nervous because we haven't got into it. It's like, oh, what if there was antisocial behavior, and what if there was a lot of maintenance and damage and all that kind of stuff? Was a lot of those kind of niggling issues, which is why we never considered it in the first place, because we thought it was just too hard. And it was only after the education and the knowledge piece that we thought, okay, so if we got confronted with this issue, this is the way that we would deal with it.
mm.
And now that we have the time to kind of spend a bit more time than a single let, that's what made us take the leap of faith, I would say.
It sounds like you've taken some very logical steps to building the business that you ultimately have. You really thought about the things that could go wrong and looked at how you could maybe manage that if it did go wrong, or sidestep the issue altogether, which I think is a really intelligent way of looking at it. Because from a glance, and I imagine, particularly for you guys, not even necessarily knowing the UK property market that well, it could be quite a daunting task. And there is actually a lot of stuff that you kind of need to know. If you know it, it's not that difficult. But if you don't know it, it's very, very overwhelming, very daunting, and can get you in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. When we first came here, I didn't even know what a chain was. I didn't know what a HMO was.
Yeah.
There was a lot of stuff that I didn't know. We just thought it was exactly the same. And the Australian rules are very much like Scotland. Once you sign it, that's a done deal. That's what's this whole backing out thing. I just didn't understand that concept. I thought it was so unethical, the way that it could be legally done. It was mind-boggling. I think when we first came here, it was a big wake-up call in terms of understanding that house buying process.
So we're going to talk about a case study of yours today. You've done a fantastic case study for us, which is inside the HMO roadmap, but it's a 9-bed, and I'm really quite excited to talk to you about that project because I think it's quite unique for a few reasons. But before we get into that, and it's not normally how I kick off the podcast, but what do you enjoy most about investing in HMOs, Sarah? What is it that you like doing, and why do you want to continue investing in HMOs? You can probably guess what the next question is going to be as well.
You know what? I've actually done a 180. I've gone from absolutely being terrified of tenants to absolutely loving them.
Yeah.
I think once you get to know them and understand their story and knowing that you're helping them out by providing quality accommodation they couldn't get elsewhere, that feedback you get from them, that's probably the best bit. And I would not have said this 2.5 years ago. Absolutely not. I would absolutely be like, oh my God, I really don't want to talk to them. I really don't want the confrontation. And I've literally gone a whole 180 going, that's actually the best part, is actually the viewing stage where you can actually, see whether or not you're the right fit for each other is actually the best part of it.
What stuff don't you enjoy? What stuff hasn't gone well? What do you find particularly challenging about investing in HMOs?
Maintenance. The constant upkeep and maintenance. And I think it's because we always want to make our places, top of the market and premium. So it's not the wear and tear part, or part of it is. Some of it is, that happens on single lets too. So there's absolutely no difference. But there is a lot more maintenance to coordinate. And I think once you scale up, you start seeing the economies of scale in terms of getting the handyman out to service all 4 of them at the same time. Makes it a lot easier than trying to coordinate. Oh, can I have access for this one? And can I get the guy out on this one? And how urgent is it? And all that kind of stuff. I think once you've got that right team, it makes it a lot easier. But it's still, sometimes when you do get that call out, oh no, what do I need to do? So sometimes I still think maintenance can be a bit of a pain in the backside sometimes.
It's interesting you say that, because today I've got a couple of hours booked out this afternoon to look at a variety of maintenance things that we've got planned in the business, and this is only over a handful of the properties. So we've been re-inspecting this month. We've also had some license re-inspections and some bits and pieces, some conditions that they've imposed that they want us to do, and we're already into hundreds of items, and actually that becomes quite a mammoth task. None of them themselves are particularly difficult, but actually when you're thinking about organising teams to go in and you want to do it cost effectively, all of a sudden you've got to think, okay, right, well, we've got fire doors and changes to some fire doors in all of these properties. So actually, we don't want the guys just to go and get one overhead closer for that house. We'll need one for that one, that one, that one, and X, Y, and Z as well. And you kind of got to be a bit of a logistics specialist, I think sometimes as your portfolio grows. And if you're not, you end up paying. If you're not on top of maintenance, you end up paying those call-out fees. And people go to do really small jobs, but it costs you an absolute fortune if you're not careful. And all of a sudden, you can be paying huge amounts for maintenance and things. So I definitely feel your pain, and it's one of the things that we always struggle with. Of course, it's part and parcel of being a HMO landlord, isn't it? But I am with you on that. It is challenging at times for sure. Yeah. So you've got 4 HMOs at the minute, and you were just telling us that you are thinking about maybe taking your foot off that pedal a little bit and just buying some more single lets. But there was a plan behind it. I think there's that's kind of a school of thought that it potentially might work better in the long run for you.
Yeah, so I think our plan is to go kind of back to buy to let. And I think the property for us is always like a 30, 40, 50-year game, like a lifetime thing. And so what we're doing with the next one is we're buying it as a buy to let, keep it really simple. We'll probably get planning on it, see how that goes. I think at this stage with all the utilities and all the stuff that's happening with that and margin pressure as well with is the way that they are. That's why we wanted to go back to buy-to-lets. And I think in our area, buy-to-lets, for the amount of effort that they have versus what you get, the cash flow is almost the same, I would say. For the amount of, if you add in the bills, the maintenance, all that kind of stuff, it ends up being just as good. So our next one should cash flow around £900 a month as a buy-to-let.
Wow.
As a HMO would cash flow about 1,003 if we self-manage. So for that difference, it's something we want to have the option of doing down the track. Mm-hmm. But for now, we want to keep it really simple in the portfolio, just with our personal circumstances, just makes it a little bit less effort heavy, because this will be in a slightly different area to where we normally play in.
Okay, that's really quite interesting to hear you say that. I've definitely got my eye on things like utility costs and definitely making some preparations to see costs go up. We're trying to react. We're looking at the rents. We're trying to reduce costs elsewhere. But I think you're absolutely right to be sort of thinking, okay, what does the next couple of years look like? And I definitely think it looks squeezed for sure. And I think we're going to have to react. What do you think? What do you think makes a good HMO, Sarah? It's quite a broad question, and I've never asked that to anybody before. But what do you think makes a good HMO? What are the ingredients for a good and well-performing HMO?
I think there's kind of two sides to that. So there is the overall house part, the amount of space people get, all of that kind of thing, the amenities, the area, all the stuff you normally get on a standard house. But I think what makes a HMO is the congruency of people in it. So whether or not they get along with each other is 100% what makes it or breaks it. I've got houses that were absolutely not, I wouldn't say at war with each other, but they weren't getting along. And it can make your life extremely difficult and make their life really difficult as well. And I've got houses that are like, you would think that they're family because they get along so well. They never have problems with each other. They'll take the turns putting the bins out. Like, that's the kind of stuff, and that's the kind of households you want to create. So I think, to me, the mix of housemates is so critically important to running a good HMO.
I absolutely agree. I was out last night with some of our masterminders. After mastermind, we went for a beer and some food, and a really cool place in Sheffield that we like to go to. And a load of my tenants were in there. A new tenant had moved in, and they were all out and sort of kind of welcoming into Sheffield. And it was really nice to see it. I had a chat with my tenants. It was nice to see those guys all out together and chatting. And you're absolutely right. Happy tenants, I think, happy landlords. What do you do though, Sarah, to try and make sure that happens? How do you try and ensure that you get the right tenants that bond, tenants that are cohesive?
It's a really good question. So it's taken me a while to nut down this process, but I'll honestly say the pre-screening is 100% the most critical thing that you can get. So for me, it's before they even want to view. I have a massively long pre-screening form, and some people, I do things, but in terms of time and getting the right people, if you can't complete a form to begin with, you're not going to survive this admin process. Like, it's just not going to work. So for me, it's nutting out those people who are really serious, and then understanding the reasons why they want to move. So is it for work? Is it to be closer to friends and family? Is it, I guess, downsizing from a one-bed flat and paying all those bills and going into somewhere a little bit nicer but sharing due to cost? So understanding what people want by a thorough pre-screening form, and then a viewing or a video chat after that to understand and get to know them is key. And that's where you get to know, okay, so this person is sociable, working professional, works on whatever it is, would be a really good fit for this house, but maybe not that house. And I think that's where, when you can start to piece the puzzle together in terms of house cohesiveness, that's where you see the magic happen.
We use a similar process, actually. So we have a form where our tenants to fill that in, and it is a little bit long-winded, but I think you're absolutely right. I think if people aren't prepared to do that, because deciding where you live and who you live with is a big decision, right? It's not something that should be taken lightly for a tenant or for us. And I use the same process. I use a similar process actually when we're interviewing. Like, if I'm bringing somebody new into the team or recruiting for a position, that's one of the things that we'll always do. And that often separates sort of, a lot of people from the process immediately, because some people either rush through the form or don't fill it out very well. They make loads of mistakes, or they just don't bother to even fill it in whatsoever. In which case, you think, great, you know what? I'm not going to waste my time actually showing you the house or interviewing you, or even considering you for this role. So I'm with you. I think that's a really good way to do it. One of the things I do, I don't know if you do this as well, is I train my team to do this. We're always looking out for yellow flags as well, like quite subtly looking out for yellow flags. So I think things like somebody who needs accommodation today or tomorrow, like I always think is a yellow flag. And I often get a bit of resistance, or I used to get resistance from my team on this, because they think that's great. We've got somebody who wants to move in straight away, and we've got this room, we can move them in tomorrow. And I'm saying, but why? Why does somebody need to move in tomorrow? I think understanding what's going on is really important, because certainly in my experience doing this for a long time, there are often clues, as to why. Are they rushing out of accommodation? Are they somebody who makes quick decisions without really thinking them through? And often, and where we have previously sort of given people like this the benefit of the doubt or ignored those yellow flags, we've sort of paid for making that mistake. Do you kind of have these yellow flags that you're looking out for as well, and do you see this sort of stuff?
Oh, absolutely, red flag, right there, right
Yeah,
there. If you're
red
moving
flag.
out today and you don't want to go through everything, red flag.
Yeah.
I think to us, there's quite a few things. One of them is definitely move in today. I think another one is also another good one that we look out for is where they say they're single occupancy and really want to move in their entire family. That's another good one. Oh yeah, I'll just have a kid down the no, that's that's probably not gonna work. So when they're like, oh, do you accept couples or can my girlfriend stay? What's your guest policy? When there's questions like that
Yeah.
also raises a red flag
Absolutely.
because that will put us over our occupancy for our license. And I'm not, that's absolute no for me. That's
Absolutely.
another red flag when people ask about how many times can people stay over and
Yeah.
things like that. And you really got to question. Some of it is a genuine question, which is perfectly fine. And then others, it's because they want to move in, the rest of their family. So
That's
it's
right,
just
yeah.
about distinguishing the two. That would be my other big red flag.
Yeah.
And then sometimes if there's anything like CCJs or affordability, that's the first thing that we screen on. So
Yeah.
if you can't meet the affordability, there's no point even going to a viewing because we know you can't afford the room. Or if it is that case, then, but I have, this was a classic one. We took someone for a viewing thinking that they could afford it. Oh, by the way, I have a £30,000 CCJ.
Okay.
Yeah, no. This isn't gonna work. And so now we screen for CCJ declarations and things like that. And it's not foolproof. I wouldn't say it's, you can get everybody's going to be truthful on the first one, but you can kind of tell what kind of person they would be if they're avoiding questions like.
So I think the people who are the best at it, they're professionals, they're experts at kind of trying to wriggle their way through processes like this, and are prepared to sort of tell you whatever you need. And those are the people that you've really got to look out for. And it's sad, and unfortunately it's a small minority. But we've learned the hard way before. We've taken our eye off the ball. We've not taken note of those yellow flags, and we've ended up with one or two people in some of the houses that have become problematic. And I've taken a bit of flack for talking about this actually in the community before, because we have quite a rigid policy on things like CCJs, and the reason is because we can't afford to take that risk. Actually the liability of somebody not paying, or somebody coming to the house or being disruptive, whatever it is, which I think things like CCJs are sort of, well, there's certainly evidence of not paying a debt, and okay, maybe the full story of that is missing, but the risk for us is just too great, particularly in professional HMOs, where one room that's not paying and being difficult, whatever, can really sort of upset everything else that's going on in that house. So we have a blanket policy on that, and it's a no. And I've got another question for you, actually, Sarah. Do you take guarantors? Do you have guarantors for all of your tenants or not?
I like this one because we've actually recently changed that. So prior to probably 2021, I didn't. I think this year I've been a bit more, I wouldn't say lenient. I would say guarantors would then cover me if anything went wrong. So we've recently had 3 recently. I've taken one with a guarantor, and it was only because of her circumstances. She is working as a teacher's aide, but she's also doing her PhD at the same time. So her main crux of the job is that teacher's aide job, and the PhD is just kind of supplementing that. So that's why she was on half the salary she was on. So she didn't meet affordability criteria. We took guarantor for her.
Yeah.
And it's been great. We've also been taken a little bit up front. So not a massive amount, not the whole tenancy, but just to cover us if anything did go wrong, at least half of it is covered, and also covered by guarantor. The other thing that we've been getting a lot of is from overseas recently. So they're coming through, they've got professional jobs and quite high salaries. And because there's no UK credit history, we've either had to again get upfront and or get a guarantor that is either a company or a family or friend that they have in the UK just to cover us. So I wouldn't rule it out. I'd say it's kind of expanded our policy a little bit to really understand the full picture before just saying absolute, oh, sorry, that's otherwise, previous to that, we would have just said no, outright no. But it doesn't necessarily mean that their circumstances are poor or bad. I think it's just a development of the way we evolve our letting side of the business.
Have you ever had any issues? So I imagine some of your tenants, your rents are pretty high. Have you ever had issues with tenants who don't feel like they should have to give you a guarantor? They may be embarrassed about asking for a guarantor. Has that ever been an issue for you?
It's actually one of the questions we have in our pre-screen form. So we put, do you have a guarantor? Yes, no, or I could probably find one. That is usually a good giveaway, because if the answer is outright no, and I'm not going to find one, and my affordability doesn't work, sorry, didn't meet the criteria there. So I think it's just another filtering aspect of the pre-screen. It doesn't mean that we would exclude them. We would just kind of understand why and what the circumstances were as to why they couldn't find one. And some of it is a genuine reason. But if it's because I really can't be bothered and I want the room, well, the attitude in itself towards that is a dead giveaway of someone we probably don't want in the house.
We insist on guarantors for everybody. There are a few small exceptions for some of our overseas student tenants, but typically they're on the joint contracts, and we make sure that the other tenants and the other guarantors are aware of that. And occasionally we'll use a service called Helping Hand. I think it's called Helping Hand, and they're like an insurance-based service that will guarantor tenants. Well, it's a bit more expensive for the tenants, but it's a policy that's worked really well for us. I think when everything kicked off with the lockdowns and stuff, we were literally inundated from tenants who were sort of telling us that they didn't want to pay their rent, and they had sorts of concerns which we understood, but the real sort of narrative was that they didn't want to pay their rent, and particularly a lot of our student tenants as well, who sort of just thought because they'd moved home, or most of them in fact hadn't moved home. We now know that, but they were just pushing their luck. And honestly, I think without having guarantors across our entire portfolio, I think we would have lost tens of thousands of pounds in the pandemic. I think we would have found that a good chunk, I think maybe as many as 30% of our tenants may have just moved out overnight and decided to stop paying their rent overnight. And I think without the ability to sort of lean and put some pressure on the guarantors to make sure that didn't happen, we really would have struggled. So some of our students, for example, would use things like they were furloughed, or they just lost their part-time jobs, which did happen. And they were the sorts of excuses that they would give us as well as others. But of course, they had parents, and they had parents who may have been furloughed, in which case they should have still been getting paid. And we were able to sort of put that pressure on them, and and we had these forms of paperwork to sort of demonstrate to us if you are actually in financial difficulty. And of course, not a single tenant across the whole portfolio ever filled in that form whatsoever. We don't think anyone was genuinely in any financial difficulty through the pandemic, but I think without the guarantors, it would have been an absolute nightmare for us. And I know a lot of people particularly in central London, where there was just an exodus of people leaving the city, so they just left their accommodation overnight. They were maybe in fixed term tenancies, they just left. Because what were you going to do? You couldn't take them to court because the courts were shut. You couldn't put your hand in the bank account and take the money, and so people were just left with empty rooms. So it's quite interesting hearing about some of your policies there. Let's have a chat about your case study then, Sarah. This is a cool project. So first of all, this particular HMO it's a relatively new build property. It looks really cool. It looks pretty cool. So this was, did you say it was 3 or 4 years old when you bought this? So that itself, I think, is quite unique, because a lot of people, well, most of us are buying quite old and tired properties, and actually this looks like a really, really great property. But I think you described it as kind of a bit of a white box inside, did you?
Yeah, to me, I was just buying a big Magnolia box. That's exactly what I bought, a big Magnolia box. It was a blank canvas, basically ready to go. It was built to pretty recent building reg standards, so it already came with fire doors. It already came with smoke alarms in every room. It already came with closers, actually, for this one. It's pretty much almost a ready-made, I wouldn't say ready-made, but There wasn't too much that needed to be done to it to make it into a HMO. So we weren't moving walls. I didn't want to move walls. I needed it to be pretty much done and ready. So I think by the time we got keys in December 2020, it took us 47 days to hand over the keys to the first tenant.
Wow. So you paid 300,000 for this property, Sarah.
Yeah.
And you spent about 20,000 on it, which I think is remarkable when you are about to tell us that how many bedrooms you've got in this?
So this one is technically 7, but we've got planning for 9 occupants. So we've got a couple of double rooms. We could split some of the big ones further, but I think that would compromise, I guess, the style that we're going for. So, I think we're not the type of people to just carve things up and put things into a small box room, because we've got competitors in our area that do that already. And their turnover, because the rooms are so small, you're talking 7 square meters, they turn over all the time. So we wanted to go the opposite: bigger rooms, longer tenancies, premium rent. That's what we wanted to go for, knowing that if we wanted to down the track, we probably could, but I don't think we would.
That is quite a slim budget. We particularly when I'm not quite sure the average of the refurbs across all of the case studies we've got inside the HMO roadmap are, but I would hazard a guess is that it's probably somewhere between 50 and 100,000. So at 20,000, it's a fraction of a lot of them. But the spec, and I'm just looking at the pictures now, is incredible. You've got sort of a green wall. You've got some awesome vinyls. It's really cool. The furniture looks brilliant. So, how did you do this? Is this because it was primarily cosmetic work? You didn't really have to do anything, have to make any material changes to the floor plan. Is that how you managed to keep the cost so low?
Yeah, that's basically it, really. So it was a massive cosmetic turnarounds is what we specialize in, I would say. I think all of our projects, bar 1 or 2, have been really quick cosmetic flips and turnarounds. So a lot of what you see there is paint. So we kept the original floor. That was so brand new. There was, working with what you have, I think is 100% key to keeping costs down, because that kitchen was only 2-3 years old. I wasn't going to knock it out. I don't like cream as a color. It wouldn't be my choice. But from a return on investment point of view, there's absolutely no reason why I would knock that out. I might have sprayed it if I didn't really like the color. But this was stage 1. We're about to embark on stage 2 later this year, and that's to expand the kitchen where we have at the moment. So because we knew all those plans in place and exactly what we wanted to do to it, I wouldn't say this was a tart-up job, because it wasn't. It was quite a big cosmetic budget, but we didn't have to put in bathrooms. We didn't have to move walls. We didn't have to do all of that. So that extremely kept the cost down. And I think most of it was in the spec upgrade. So the cold smoke seals, a couple of extra smoke alarms, not really, emergency lighting, core points everywhere. That was the main part of it. And also decoration. Decoration was the other part of absolutely 10 out of the 20K, because it was 2,200 square feet. The whole thing got repainted. Everything that was a magnolia wall was repainted somewhere. So I think paint can have a massive return on investment, massive return for every, I think, pound that you put in, you probably get 3 in terms of value out of it. So that's what we did for everything, was paint, vinyls, make it really cool. It didn't really cost that much to look, the way that it is. Putting in a bar, for example, or putting in the pool table or the yoga table, as much as they're attractions to the house that make it really different, it didn't cost that much to put in.
So for you guys listening, I'm looking at the pictures of this, and it is such a cool project. That's a yoga mat and a foam roller on the wall, right, Sarah?
Yeah.
Love it.
That's our wellness corner.
Love it. You've got a wellness corner. And you said in this case study, this is a 2,200 square foot piece. So this is a big project. Actually, and that sounds like really good value for money at 300,000 to me. So I've got a question for you about your strategy at this point then, Sarah. Because listening to you talk about this project, looking at it, it's a new project. It's a fairly new build, so I'm assuming that nobody's really going to sell a property of that sort of caliber and spec at a real discount. You only bought it in the last few years. You spent 20,000 on it. pretty small budget. You didn't materially add any space or anything like that. So looking at your strategy, is recycling cash an important part of your strategy? In my hand, I've obviously got the revals, and we had a quick chat about this, which I'm really interested to get onto. But I'm just wondering, going into this deal, what you were thinking about in terms of things like revaluations.
For us, property is where we park our cash.
Yeah.
So we've never used, the other thing is haven't used investors. This was our own money that we had from our existing portfolio. So through refinance, because we've been doing this for 10 years, obviously as things come up for refinance, we then plow it back in. So our pot just keeps, I guess, self-regenerating, if that's even a word. And at the time I was also working. So the way we always did things was we lived off one salary, we invested the other, plus the refinance. That's how our pot of money came about.
Okay.
So property, again, for us, long-term plan, we weren't looking to recycle cash straight away. So it wasn't like, oh, I've plowed in 100 grand into my refurb, I need that money out to pay back investors. For us, it was, this is a 30-year plan. We're going to put the money in. We'll put it on a 2-year fix. And then outside of the 2 years, when we do the upgrades and do all of that kind of stuff, we'll then have a look at what the revaluation is at that 2-year point. So we weren't desperate to get out. We weren't on a bridge because we weren't moving any, there's no structural work that we were doing. It was literally just paint on the walls and a few upgrades that we could do within 2 weeks. So that's the kind of stuff that we were willing to wait for that reval. So reval wasn't 100% what we were in for. We were in this for the cash flow.
Okay, it's really interesting to hear that. So you're waiting to reval this now, aren't you? So you've got lending in place, you've done your refinance, and now you're waiting to reval this. And you know your market, you know what you're investing in. And in the case study, we obviously asked you to put a sort of a reval figure or an estimate of your reval figure, and you put 400. Even at 400, I mean, your all-in costs, I think you're 335,000. So at 400,000, that's a pretty decent gain, off the back of a £20,000 refurb. And I want to come back to the planning as well in a second that we haven't talked about yet. But we had an interesting conversation before we hit the record button today, which was about that. And you actually said that the commercial valuation you think may well be substantially more. What do you think that value could be?
So I'm friends with people that do mega mows in my area. And I'm talking like, 8, 9, 10, 11 beds. And I know what commercial they got. For around about the same size. So their bedrooms were a little bit smaller actually, but the same amount of occupants. So probably about 10 occupants. And I knew that they were getting about 600 plus. Now, I'm not saying that's what we're going for. I always stack mine on a bricks and mortar. And if we get a hybrid or a commercial val, bonus. All of that is bonus upside. I never take I'm going to bank on a commercial revaluation and then get stung, because I've seen that happen, and it is really, really hard. Yeah. Especially when you've got investors and bridging involved. So for us, I always take the bricks and mortar value. Where we put in the upside, or a lot of that gain, is through planning. So that's where we get a lot of our upside. And then on top of that, all the stuff that we do with the refurb to make it a lot better than it was. That's where I think you see the gains. But it's also the market rising as well. Everything just working with us together. That is what we're finding. That 400,000 is probably, if we sold it today, I'd be pretty happy with the 400,000 where it is because of that planning uplift. If we got commercial, I'd hopefully looking at the high 5s or 6s.
This is fascinating because I think that this conversation is so important and is not being had enough. But really, what you just said in a nutshell is that you didn't know what the end value was really going to be, and although it wasn't a huge priority to you, it's actually quite difficult to know. And I think that this is something that a lot of people struggle with, particularly, as you say, if you're using private finance and you need a bit more specificity around what that end value is going to be, so that you can get that cash out, pay investors back. But much like myself, Sarah, you're saying, look, I kind of know what I think it's going to be. It may be more, it may be less, and if it's more, that's great. But actually, I'm not putting all my eggs in that basket. And I think that that's a really important thing for people to think about. And I think for people who are investing funds into this and do need to get cash out, one of the things that I often suggest to people is give yourself a runway. If things don't go right, if that valuation doesn't stack up where you need it to be, give yourself a runway. Make sure that you're not on the hook to having to pay that debt back immediately, yeah, maybe give yourself another 12 months on it, or look at whether or not you could service that debt from other parts of your portfolio, whatever it might be. Let's talk about the planning then. So this was cool. So you actually got your offer accepted on this, and then you went into planning on it. Before you actually completed on this, you went into planning and you got the planning, right?
Yeah, so this was a wicked story, right? So we were going to do this and get this done and dusted before Article 4 came in. So we had a pending looming thing where the council told us, hey guys, it's November 2019 and we're sticking Article 4 in your, and we're like, oh, I just got into HMOs and now this Article 4 thing's like creeping on me. So we're like, right, what can I buy before this Article 4 deadline? This is how it all started. We put in our offer in May 2019, thinking we got a good 6 months to get it through, 4 months, two months to refurb. We're going to make this deadline. Halfway through, the upper chain fell through on this deal because she was moving house. And the vendor was super lovely. She might be listening to this, who knows? But the vendor was great. She was selling her house because she wanted to kind of upgrade. The upper chain fell through, and we're like, we've just spent $2,000 in legals. Oh my God. I then went to another HMO investor in our local area who to me is kind of like a semi-coach or mentor, not officially, but I said to her, look, this is the situation I'm in. I feel like I'm in a pickle because I feel like I've just lost $2,000. I'm not going to meet this deadline. And then we're going to have to go through planning and take a risk whether or not we're even going to get planning. Because if we don't, we've just bought a really, really expensive single let that we can't do anything with. And that's a big, big risk to me. I'm very risk adverse. So I always was like, if we can't make this deadline, I think we're going to have to pull out. And then that's the conversation I had with her at 10 o'clock at night. I was like, this has just happened. I don't know what to do. And she said to me, well, why don't you do what we did and get planning before you buy it? And I'm like, you can't get planning on something you don't own. She's like, oh, yes, you can. And that was the light bulb moment for me, was you can get planning on something you don't own. And we looked at the risks and we said, okay, so what if we take it through the whole planning? I didn't know how much it costs and all that kind of stuff. It's the first time we're going to do it. And I said to her, it's like, how much is it going to cost? She's like, it's probably going to be, I don't know, less than $1,000. You've already spent $2,000. So if you walked away, you're going to lose $2,000 anyway. How much does it hurt to find out whether or not you're going to get planning on it beforehand, providing that the vendor is okay with it and you're upfront with what you're doing? So I said, okay, well, it's worth a shot because if we walked away, we would have lost all our legal money. So we were at loss anyway. So we went back to the vendor and said, look, I think I've got, this is what we want to do. We've always been upfront with you. You knew that we were going to convert this to a HMO regardless, and you were okay with that because she's kind of done a lot of, moving house, and that's kind of what she does. So she understood where we were coming from and we were very upfront. We then said to her, can we get planning for what we're planning to do beforehand and then complete with the planning in place? So we went to her, she's like, yeah, absolutely fine. I don't care what you do with it. So, she just wants to move home. So if it saved the chain, that was the solution to save the chain. So we went and did that. I think in the end, it only cost us about £640. So 400 something for the planning application and £200 to someone to actually draft it up because I cannot draw to save my life, to all that kind of mechanism. So I drafted that bit out. So all in all, I think it was about £650, something like that, for planning. And we said, look, we'll give it a go. We've already sunk in $2,000 into legals. Might as well give it a crack and see what happens. And if we're going to go for planning, we're going to go for the absolute maximum capacity that we can get, which is 9 beds, which I know will shock people, but we don't ever plan to put full on 9 people. But we want planning for 9 people. So we always have a capacity to go right to the max if we needed to sell, if we need to get out. That's what we're going to do. So we put in planning for 9 people. We had no idea what we were doing with the planning process. It was just literally winging it the entire way through. And we got planning approved in 8 weeks. It was the most simplest, straightforward process for that time. And I know I've heard the horror stories with planning and how long it can take and all that kind of stuff. It went through in 8 weeks and we got planning beforehand. As soon as we got the planning in place, we completed and did it.
So did you have any objections to it? I think there were some people who, I assume there must have been some people who objected to this.
You want to know a funny story? Absolutely, we got objections. I think we got 8 or 9 from the neighbors. And the funny thing is, my direct neighbor is actually a property sourcer. Now she got who didn't want to live next to a HMO, clearly. So she got the letter from the council, as you do, saying, hey, there's a planning application going in for a 9-bed HMO or 9 occupancy HMO next to you. She went knocking on everyone's door down the road to get them to object. And so we got 9 objections, and we saw them coming in, and half of them were just like, there's no parking. And there's plenty of parking. There's no parking. What if they're really loud and noisy and they blast their stereos? And I'm like, who has a stereo like this? So they were, they were more concerned about the licensing and amenities aspect to it, as you would as a neighbor. I completely understand. But none of it was actually relevant to planning. So that's how we got away with it. But I wouldn't say got away with it, but that's how we got through it. The objections weren't really planning objections. They were licensing objections, which we knew because we had previous HMOs that we had all the amenities like down to a T. The bedroom sizes were massive. I wouldn't say all en suites, but we had 5 bathrooms in there. There was plenty of room for all of them.
So it's kind of difficult for the council really to technically oppose this. So, and if you hadn't got the planning, then what would you have done if you hadn't got the planning for 9?
Oh, that's a good one. I think we went for 9, knowing if they knocked us back to 6 or 7, we'd still be okay with that.
Yeah.
We just went 9 so that we wouldn't have to go back again if we wanted down the road. Oh, we want more occupants now. We'll go for planning again. So we just went full hog. So if they not, we were fully expecting them to come back and go, well, we don't want 9, but maybe you can have 7, and we negotiate on that, and it would be a learning process for us. Yeah. That's what we were expecting. And they just went, yeah, approved.
This is such a great example of just you don't have to have all your ducks in a row, and it's kind of impossible to have all your ducks in a row. Sometimes you've got to just have a plan, hope for the best, plan for the worst. And this is a really interesting story. So the net monthly cash flow, this is a beast at nearly £1,900 a month, which is, I don't know, the average salary is sort of £25,000 a year. I bet that is sort of there or thereabouts, sort of in line with it's sort of a kind of an average salary in the UK, which is phenomenal from one deal. And the return on your capital. So if you get this revalued at 400, this will be a 65% return on your capital, which is that's amazing, really, isn't it? That's an incredible.
Yeah, and that's probably worst case scenario for us as well. So at the moment, it's just a 6. When I say just a 6-bed, we wanted to phase this because remember, this is like a 30-year hold for us. So initially we went in with 6. We wanted to see how we hadn't done anything post 5 before. So we wanted to see the dynamics of what it would be like as 6, and then hit the 2-year mark before we refinance. We're going to put in extra storage space for kitchens, all that kind of stuff, bring it up to 7. And then kind of go from there. I wouldn't really want to put more than 7, but we have the capacity to put more than 7. So I think that's why I always err on the side of caution. This is a conservative estimate, knowing I've got upside to play with. If I really need to pull that string because utility costs are through the roof and I need to put in more occupants to make it work, I've got the possibility to do that, but I don't have to do that. I think that's the main key from this.
I think it's also worth mentioning for context that I ask everybody to factor in a management cost at 10%, just, even if you self-manage, and I know you self-manage, but I think that alone is over £200 a month, which you've already deducted off. So actually, if you added that £200 back on, it's really you're over a couple of £1,000 a month on this project, which is fantastic. Well, everyone who's listening and wants to go and see this deal in real life, it's there and it's waiting for you inside the HMO roadmap. Thank you for sharing it with us, Sarah. Sarah, if there's one piece of advice you could give to aspiring HMO property investors, maybe people who are 1 or 2 steps behind you, who got something or just got the capital together to get the first one, what advice would you share with them?
I think the biggest light bulb moment for me was to keep an open mind. I think prior to this, if I kept a closed mind and wasn't open to other things like HMOs in general, or any kind of alternative strategy, I would have been a single landlord for life. And there's nothing wrong with that. We would have still continued our journey as we were. It probably wouldn't be as cash flowing as well, but we would have still done that. But I think keeping an open mind and, if someone else can do it, then you can too. I think that's probably the 2 takeaways that has really transformed our property journey.
What can we expect to see from you guys in the future then? Is it, single lets for the next year or so? Are you going to be aggressively buying stuff in this market? What are you planning?
We still buy. If we have the funds to do it, we buy. As soon
Still
as we
buy.
hit our threshold, we keep going. There's a little bit of diversification I think we have in the years ahead because, again, keeping an open mind. So I'd love to do a flip end of this year / next year. We've got a buy-to-let / HMO in the pipeline, and that's what we'd like to do. Keep them as buy-to-lets, knowing that they have alternative uses or strategies. So turn them into an SA down the track, turn them into a HMO down the track. So having multiple exits or options for us down the track. And then the big one for us this year would be a massive extension on our current house. So that will keep me very, very busy, up and out and structural and drains and all that kind of stuff. So that's more of a passion project for us. But yeah, keeping an open mind, always having a look at the market and seeing what that's doing. Because last year, if I expected, our utility bills would have tripled, and what that does to margin squeezes, that's a very different game that we're playing now compared to, that might pivot our strategy a bit. But I wouldn't say, the HMO market's still very strong. Demand is so high.
I think so.
I would definitely say that it's still in the pipeline. Just I think would slow that down a bit.
And if anyone wants to reach out, Sarah, maybe find out a bit more about what you're doing or whether there's a way to work with you, what's the best way to contact you?
Best way to contact us is Instagram. That's where I hang out probably the most. And also, I guess, via LinkedIn or email us at hello@altstreetproperty.com.
Yeah, and on the gram, it's Alt Street Property.
Yep.
Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for your very honest account of investing in HMOs. Thank you for sharing an incredible case study with us. And thank you for sharing some questions today that I just sort of came to me. And, I was just really keen to find out a little bit more how you actually run your portfolio as well. So thank you for sharing some of that inside information as well.
Thank you for having me on. It's been great.
Thanks, Sarah.